Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video episode on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction House taking a look at some of the cool guns coming up for sale on their December 2014 premiere auction. And one of them that's really awesome is this Mondragon semi-auto rifle. The generally accepted story is that the Mondragon is the first adopted military semi-auto combat rifle. And that's pretty much true. You know, as with anything, there are shades. There were some Danish rifles that were semi-auto that were adopted earlier in the 1890s, but those, we're talking a total number adopted of 50 or 60, and not necessarily really all that successful of a rifle. The Mondragon, it worked, it was made, it was mass-produced, and it was issued. Didn't quite turn out as well as the Mexican military had hoped, but that's kind of a side note. This rifle was designed by a Mexican general named Manuel Mondragon. Probably not pronouncing that quite right, but he had a long career in arms design. He designed several other rifles. He designed some artillery innovations. Very smart dude. And he worked fairly closely with Colonel Rubin and the manufacturing company of SIG in Neuhausen, Switzerland. And that's where these rifles were actually manufactured. Mondragon designed it. SIG had the facilities for manufacturing, and they were all produced there. And in fact, it says so on the top of the receiver. These were chambered, the military version was chambered for 7x57 Mauser. That was the standard Mexican military cartridge of the day. There were some experiments and tests with Mondragons made in a few other calibers, including 7.5 Swiss, which would be interesting. That, of course, because they were being made in Switzerland. And also the 30-30 Winchester. Kind of an unusual cartridge for a self-loading rifle, but 30-30 was an extremely common cartridge in Mexico around the turn of the century, so that also kind of makes sense. But like I said, the main military version was in 7mm Mauser. Now the Mondragon action is kind of interesting, and in some ways dramatically overbuilt. So let's bring the camera on and take a closer look at it. So let's start at the front end of the Mondragon, at the muzzle. We have these bit of interesting mechanical complication here. Now what this is, I believe, I haven't fired one of these, so I'm a little bit out of my league here. I believe this is for disassembly of the gas system. And then this is the lever that allows one to disconnect or to cut off the gas port and render the gun a single shot, manually operated action. So this would be for a single shot, and there's a note A, automatic. Run it that way, and the design of the lever kind of follows the gas travel in that now gas is allowed to come from the barrel down into the gas port here and operate a long stroke piston which runs underneath the barrel all the way back to the action back here. Now specifically, that gas piston, in some ways it kind of resembles the gas piston on the M1 in that it's under the barrel and then it comes up on the side. You can see that the stock is bulged out here to give some space for it. And it is located then right here. So this is the end of the operating rod, and it has this lug that the bolt handle latches onto like that. Zoom in on that a little bit. So this is the operating rod, and we have this lug. I can't pull it back by hand, it's too stiff. It does have its own recoil spring to pull it back forward after firing, and then the bolt handle has this claw that locks onto the lug, and that's what connects the bolt to the gas piston. Now, in order to operate, what happens is when you fire, gas pressure, of course, pushes this piston back. That piston is locked onto the bolt here, so it pushes the bolt back. Now, you can see we have a set of rotating locking lugs here at the front. There is a cam right there in the bolt itself, and then a matching lug in the bolt handle, which is connected to the op rod. Again, in principle, this is fairly similar to how the M1 operates. So as this handle comes backward, that cam forces the bolt to rotate, that unlocks the lugs, and then allows the bolt to travel backwards. What's interesting about the Mondragon is that it actually has doubled everything up for reliability. So there's a second set of locking lugs at the rear of the bolt here, and you can see they have a little cutout in the rear of the receiver. So when I pull the bolt back, both sets of lugs unlock. There's a duplicate unlocking cam and lug. So there's a cam back here on the bolt as well as this one up on the front, and of course 2 lugs in the bolt handle to operate those. Disassembly would be done by rotating this locking screw so the flat allows this to unlock. You would then unscrew this rear cap, that comes off, and then all the mechanical bits of the gun can come out the back. Let's see. I should point out here, I've kind of been using this and not explaining it. There is a latch. This button, which you push up and then rotate, locks out the handle here. What this does, if you're going to use the rifle in semi-auto or in bolt action mode, you can allow this handle to be squeezed, which allows you to disconnect the bolt and the handle from the operating rod. So if the op rod, in worst case scenario, if the op rod has been frozen up by carbon debris, you don't have to try and yank it open with each shot. And in normal use, this just means you're not fighting the recoil spring of the operating rod in order to cycle the rifle by hand. Then if you're going to be shooting in semi-auto mode, what we do is rotate that back in place. That prevents this handle from being depressed, which means that the bolt handle is fixed onto the gas piston. So this is kind of an extra bonus feature in addition to the gas cutoff at the front of the rifle. Well, looking at the bottom, we have a safety here, pretty simple. Snapping it back engages the safety, that locks the trigger. Simple and effective. So this rifle is equipped with a fixed 10-round magazine. You can see this isn't detachable. You could use, say, the nose of a cartridge, push this button in and remove the floor plate spring and follower. But this rifle, this particular one, is designed to be loaded using stripper clips, 5 rounds at a time. Now these guns were capable of using detachable magazines as well, and this has the magazine catch for it. What you would do is take out the existing floor plate and follower, and then you have 20 and 30 round box and drum magazines that could fit in its place. And if you're doing that, this is the magazine catch that locks them in. You can take a look at the rear sight here. These are graduated out to 2,000 meters, which is pretty typical of the day. Doesn't mean it's actually practical, but that was standard procedure. And our markings on the back of the gun tell kind of a cool story of their own. These were adopted in 1908. You can see this has model 1908. And the president of Mexico at the time was a man named Porfirio Diaz, and he was a genuine gun nut, very interested in firearms and weaponry, and always trying to keep up on the latest developments, which is part of why the Mexican army adopted this semi-auto rifle so early in the first place. He was also influential in some of the other Mexican army contracts of the time. Mexico actually bought a lot of Arisakas, and that was in part through Diaz's influence. And kind of in order to kiss up to him, or make him happy, they adopted this rifle and formally named it the Fusil Porfirio Diaz, or the Porfirio Diaz rifle, Sistema Mondragon. So it's the Porfirio Diaz rifle based on the Mondragon or Mondragon operating system, model 1908, and then it was manufactured in Neuhausen, Switzerland by SIG. And of course we have a Mexican national crest on the receiver there. See? A little hard to make out with the glare here, but that is the Mexican crest of an eagle clutching a snake in its claws. So, like many semi-auto rifles of this period, the very early ones, the Mondragon runs reliably as long as it has good ammunition and it's in a good, clean, sterile environment. The problem is it doesn't take much in the way of poorly toleranced ammunition or dirt getting into the action to lock this rifle up and prevent it from operating reliably. Now, it was manufactured by SIG, so the quality of the fabrication is very good. The problem that the Mondragon ran into is that it was going to be used in Mexico with Mexican-produced ammunition. Now, at the time, we're talking 1911 is when deliveries of these rifles began. Mexican fabrication of ammunition was kind of shoddy, and the rifles didn't run very well on Mexican-made ammo. That hadn't really been anticipated by the Mexican army, and it didn't help that at the same time a revolution overthrew Porfirio Diaz in 1911. And so the Mexicans had ordered 4,000 of these guns, and SIG made 4,000 of them. The problem is, after the Mexicans started receiving them and started having trouble with them operating well in the field, after they'd gotten 1,000 of them delivered, they canceled the contract. They refused to accept deliveries or pay for any more of the guns. Now that kind of left SIG in a bit of a quandary. They had 3,000 of these rifles left, and well, they hadn't been paid. They put all the money in to manufacture them. They were in a bit of a spot. What they ended up doing was actually selling the remaining Mondragon rifles to the German military in 1915. The Germans at that point were, of course, in the midst of World War I and were in need of weaponry. They found that this was not a very reliable weapon on the ground in the trenches. For obvious reasons, it doesn't take much mud to jam this thing up pretty well. But what they did work well as were aviation rifles. So these were adopted by the German military as the Flyer's self-loading carbine, and they were given to balloon troops and aircraft observers. For that short little period of time between when Flyers started carrying arms and when they started mounting real machine guns in airplanes. So for that brief period when what you would have would be a self-loading carbine or a shotgun or even just a handgun, this was a pretty good rifle for an observer in an airplane or a balloon. It was the Germans who were the main drivers behind the large magazines, the 30-round snail drum type magazine for these. You know, it meant you didn't have to reload often, you didn't have to mess with the gun, and you could make very fast follow-up shots for the time when you're taking pot shots at other flying, fast-moving aircraft. So that was the fate of the remainder of these rifles. Handling-wise, they're a little heavy, a little bit awkward, but very cool. So hopefully, whoever ends up buying this will actually take it out and shoot it. You know, these guns deserve to be shot, I think. If you'd like that person to be you, if you'd like to add this to your own collection, go ahead and click the link below. That'll take you to Rock Island Auction's catalog page. You can see their pictures and read their description of the gun and place a bid or come out here to Illinois and participate in the auction live. Good luck if you choose to do that, and thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. There were some experimental Mondragons. Are you done yet? No. There's a train going by. Now? All right. There were some experimental Mondragons.